Here comes the audience. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you feel like it, please pipe up in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. It'd be really great. We'll just wait for attendance to sort of plateau, and then we'll get started in just a minute. All right. We have guests from California, Nashville, New England, Oregon. Wow, this is the nice thing about our Zoom readings, is that although we can't be in our stores, it's really great to be able to draw such a crowd that spans so many different time zones, sometimes countries. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from, and we'll get started in just a moment. Hi, Mia. Thanks for being here. Okay, so I'll just start introducing the event, and we have a jam-packed hour, so let's get going. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jean from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event celebrating the new Best American Poetry 2021 anthology with editors Tracy K. Smith and David Lehman. They will be joined by contributing poets Chen Chen, Rachel Eliza Griffiths, Nancy Miller Gomez, and Dora Malik, so you're in for an excellent time. Before I start, I just want to say a huge thanks to all of our presenters tonight and the team at Scribner for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here, and we're really grateful for your support and for this chance to make space for conversation and connection over books. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the authors and to interact with your fellow attendees, like many of you are doing. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by one of the presenters tonight, please post that question in the Q&A module, which is different. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, The Best American Poetry 2021, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Avenue stores, where you can purchase this anthology and many other books on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US, and I'll drop the buy link in the chat periodically. You can also buy the collections of our featured poets tonight. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Now I'm going to introduce our hosts for the evening. David Lehman is the series editor for the Best American Poetry series, and he's also the editor of the Oxford Book of American Poetry. His 11 books of poetry include Playlist, Poems in the Manner of, New and Selected Poems, and more. The most recent of his many nonfiction books is 100 Autobiographies, a memoir. He lives in New York City and Ithaca, New York. Tracy K. Smith is the guest editor for the 2021 edition of the Best American Poetry Anthology. She served as United States Poet Laureate from 2017 to 2019 and is the author of 4 acclaimed collections of poetry, including most recently Wade in the Water and Life on Mars. Her memoir, Ordinary Light, was a finalist for the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2015. Educated at Harvard, Columbia, and Stanford, she is the professor of English and of African American Studies at Harvard University and the Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach Professor at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Finally, tonight's featured title, The Best American Poetry 2021, presents a choice of the year's most memorable poems with comments from the poems themselves lending insight into their work. Smith has selected a really distinguished array of works, but both vast and beautiful by such important voices as Henri Cole, Billy Collins, Nobel laureate Louise Gluck, and our featured contributors here with us tonight. So without further ado, Tracy and David are going to introduce the book and tonight's featured readers who you'll hear, whose contributions you'll then hear. Please take it away, Tracy and David.
Thank you so much, Jean, and thanks Greenlight for hosting the event. It's really great to be able to come together and celebrate in this way. David, thanks for being here as well. I feel grateful for this institution. I was just calling it in the, I guess, our virtual green room of the Best American, which, you know, you have been shepherding for years and years now. I'd love to.
Since 1988. And I always say that the most important thing the series editor gets to do is to select the person who makes the choices for the year's best poems. And I'm going to be very brief in what I say in the prefatory way, because I'd like us to spotlight the 4 poets we've chosen to honor tonight. But I would like to recall that 25 years ago at Columbia University, I taught a course in the New York School of Poets. John Ashbery, Kenneth Koch, Frank O'Hara, James Schuyler, and so on. And one of the students in the class, they were all required to write imitations of the different poets. And one student did such a spot-on imitation of Kenneth Koch that I sent it to my friend Richard Bergen, who was the editor of Boulevard, and he published it. And I believe that was the first published poem by Tracy K. Smith. And of course, since then, she's done very well for us, for herself, and for poetry. She's won a Pulitzer Prize and has served as poet laureate. And what a pleasure it is to have you edit this volume. We used to do it in person. This is the very first time we're doing it via Zoom. And I did take the opportunity to mix a very nice aperitif and lift the glass in your honor and that of our other readers. This is very nice. It's a combination of Cynar and Contratto bitters. It's a combination I recommend with lemon. Here's to you all and to poetry.
Thank you, David. I remember that class. It was a space where I really kind of got to sink into the feeling of like readerly delight. I think you transmitted that. These were poets that you clearly love. And also, I think you have a sense, even in sharing some of your students' work with editors that you knew, of literary citizenship and mentorship that I think has really stuck with me. So I'm grateful for that time, and thanks for reminding us of that history. And I'm really excited to introduce our poets as well. This year, well, the year we're still living through, the wake of 2020, as we know, was a radical form of upheaval, of clarity for so many of us in so many different ways, some expected, some completely kind of blindsiding in their form. And so reading journals and looking for poems that were capable of not only standing out as wonderful works of art, but also serving a purpose of consolation, of affirmation, of intervention, of community bolstering during this time. It was really fortifying. And I'm really excited that we have 4 poets here who I think are doing all of those things in different and inimitable ways. I'll introduce them, and then they'll read their poems in this order. And then I'm really excited about the conversation that we'll have. Chen is the author of When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities, which was published in 2017, as well as Your Emergency Contact Has Experienced an Emergency, forthcoming next fall from BOA. I've been so grateful for his ability to capture the joy, the weight, the silences, the heavy yearning of family, as well as the soul enlarging power of love, all in a voice that's deeply intelligent and playful, conversational, and philosophical. Chen's poem, The School of Eternities, appears in this year's Best American. We'll hear that soon. Nancy Miller Gomez is the author of the chapbook Punishment, which was published in 2018. And she's also co-founder of the Santa Cruz Poetry Project, which provides poetry workshops to incarcerated men and women. I've come to know Nancy via her poem Tilt-A-Whirl, which appears in the anthology. I read it as a dark, perceptive portrait of girlhood, of vulnerability, of power, or maybe like an imbalance of power that we live with, oftentimes not bringing language to it. And also this wonderful feat of memory. Rachel Eliza Griffiths is a poet, a visual artist, and a novelist. Her debut novel, Promise, is forthcoming from Random House in 2022, and her most recent collection is Seeing the Body, which is a hybrid volume that contains poetry and photography. It was nominated for a 2021 NAACP Image Award, and I feel like that sense of sight and probing insight or vision runs through all forms of Rachel Eliza's work, as does a sense of care, conscience, witness bearing, and an immensity of spirit. I feel in reading her poem Hunger, which appears in the anthology, that my vocabulary for grief and persistence and revelation are radically enlarged. I'm excited to hear that poem and hear reflect on the building of that poem. And our final reader is Dora Malik, whose most recent poetry collection is Flourish. I've loved her work for a long time for its brilliant formal exuberance, by which I mean the energy with which she hears and deploys language, which is startling, exhilarating, and also I take it as a form of relief, because it's as if she's mapping out new toeholds of clarity or recognition for me to kind of move through, and maybe sometimes even just pause and recollect myself within. Dora's poem, All the Stops, appears in this anthology, and it places the reader in active traffic, rolling through an intersection, looking forward and back, and of course, outward and in. So I'm so honored and grateful to be able to welcome these wonderful poets.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's such an honor to be here with these amazing poets. And thank you to Greenlight Bookstore, Jean, David, my fellow readers. So I'll just jump right into this poem. It's a little longer. The School of Eternities. Do you remember the two types of eternity? How we learned about them in a Wegmans parking lot? When you turned on the radio, the classical channel, why were they even talking about eternity? What did it have to do with the suddenly broody guitars? You had a peach Snapple. I remember the snappy kissy sound of the lid coming off in your hand. One type of eternity, they said, is inside of time, is endless time, life without death. We were inside our Toyota. I said, we need a new umbrella. Do you remember when we first rhymed? Do you remember the first time I asked you about the rain, the expression it's raining cats and dogs, whether it was equally cats and dogs falling? Can you remember when you learned the word immortality? The hosts on the classical channel were okay. I thought you'd do a much better job. I remember saying so while you drove us home. Our apartment, our third. Remember the day we moved into our first? The boxes of books and boxes of books, my books. Our sweating up 3 flights of the greenest stairs. And you said, never again. And the again and again. And the other type of eternity is outside of time, beyond it. No beginning, no end. I remember Your hand, the lid, your hands, the steering wheel, your lips, your lips. The way you took a sip, gave me a kiss before starting to drive. Do you remember the first time you drove me home, before home meant where we both lived? The books on the shelves, the books in the closet when I ran out of shelves, the second apartment, West Texas. Remember the dust, the flat, another type of eternity, that dusty sun. And driving to the supermarket, what was it called there? And that hand soap we get, which scent was your favorite? I don't remember what it was called, can't remember exactly the smell, but your hands after washing, I remember kissing them. Don't you remember when we thought only some things were ephemera? Can you remember when you learned the word ephemera, the word immortality? Probably the latter first, and isn't that something? Immortality first, then menus and movie tickets. What was the first nickname, the fifth umbrella, the type of taco you ordered on our 16th trip? Remember driving? Remember when we thought the world of the world? Remember how I signed the letter, explodingly yours? Do you remember you were driving? We were halfway home, only 8 minutes from Wegmans. Remember when we measured distance in terms of Wegmans? Like it was a lighthouse or pyramid or sacred tree. Remember when your name was Fluttersaurus Vex and mine wasn't? Remember when I lived like a letter falling in cartoonish slow-mo down 4 flights of stairs? Did you picture a letter of the alphabet or a letter I'd written to you? Remember when I asked you about the rain, when the wizard jumped out, when I lied and you laughed, when I lied and I lied and I lied? Can you remember last night how I crossed my arms as though dead and arranged just so, how I pictured my face polished as though alive? And no, you can't remember that, since it happened while you were sleeping and I wasn't. I was up, wondering why people always talk about death as sleep, and how much I love sleep, hate death. And have I told you about the student who said, I'm really, really afraid of death, just like that, in class? It was fitting because it was poetry class. Haha, and I loved it, her saying that. I wanted to say I loved it, but couldn't. I was thinking about you sleeping and me not, about me sleeping and you not, and what even is outside of time beyond then, now. No, thanks. I prefer the type of eternity where we are inside, are us. And last night's movie, good, not great. A stray piece of popcorn still under our coffee table. Do you remember when the world signed the letter, yours ephemerally? Remember when I asked you about the rain, the cats and dogs of it, if it was 50% cats, 50% dogs, 100% falling, and you said, of course. And you said, she's gotten, the flight's not till, I'm going to drive. I remember you driving to your mother, West Texas to upstate New York. You didn't make it in time, she had little time, then none. I remember your face pressed to my shoulder. I remember your mother was an endless a question your face asked into my shoulder, how I wanted it to answer because I couldn't, I didn't go with you when I could have. I chose a poetry reading instead. Thought she'll be there, you'll be. Is memory the best eternity we can make? The only? And you said it's equal, the cats and dogs raining down, though in terms of overall volume, the rain is all the different breeds of cat, of dog, and see, there are more individual cats since there are more very large breeds of dog. The cats have to balance things out with their number, but the dogs, don't you worry, they're raining down too. And their rain, absolutely, there's still rain, the cats and dogs, lots of water for the plants, for the flowers, for the whole street in our dusty car windows, for the cats and dogs on the ground, the cats and dogs that aren't rain, at least not yet. And maybe that's another eternity, the rainy type. I remember you drove us home. The radio was on. We made a sound like a lid coming off.
Thank you so much. Nancy, we'd love to hear from you if you're ready.
I'm ready. Am I not on? Oh, I think I have to pin myself. I just want to say thank you to Tracy and to David for including me in this amazing anthology and for inviting me to participate tonight. And I want to thank Dave Wanzike for originally publishing this poem in the New Ohio Review. Tilt-a-whirl. It was a hot day in Paola, Kansas. The rides were banging around empty as we moved through the carnival music and catcalls. At the Tilt-a-whirl, we were the only ones. My big sister chose our carriage carefully, walking a full circle until she stopped. The ride operator didn't take his eyes off her. Long, dark hair and amber eyes ringed like the golden interior of a newly felled pine. She didn't seem to notice him lingering as he checked the lap bar, and my sister asked in her sweetest, most innocent, or maybe not so innocent voice, "Can we have a long ride, please, mister?" When he sat back down at the joystick, he made a show of lighting his smoke, and the cage of his face settled into a smile I would one day learn to recognize. Here was a man who knew his life would never get better. And those dizzying red teacups began to spin my sister and me into woozy amusement. We forgot the man, the heat, our thighs sticking to the vinyl seats, our bodies glued together in a centrifugal blur of happiness beneath a red metal canopy. As we picked up speed and started to laugh, our heads thrown back, mouths open, the fabric of my sister's shirt clinging to the swinging globes of her breasts as we went faster and faster, though by then we had begun to scream, "Stop! Please stop," until our voices grew hoarse beneath the clattering pivots and dips, the air filling with diesel and cigarettes, and the man at the control stick waiting for us to spin toward him again. And each time he cocked his hand as if sighting prey down the barrel of a gun.
Eliza, I think you're still muted.
You. Zoom, 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 and mute. Thank you, Tracy. So I'll start again. Hi, everyone. It's a delight to be here. I'm Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and I want to say thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, David. Thank you, Greenlight. Thank you to all the poets who were gathered tonight and those who aren't with us. And thank you to all the editors who are reading and putting our poems everywhere and listening and being in conversation with us in these difficult times. It means a lot. I'm going to read two poems, actually, a small one and then one of my own. I'd like to start with a poem by my closest friend, Camila Aisha Moon. Camila passed away in September, this past September. And when we were younger and growing up in New York, and we used to go to the Best American Poetry readings, they were such a wonderful moment for us, as you know, our eyes would be all glowing and we'd be so excited to hear the best American poets each year. And one day we said that we would be in the Best American Poetry anthology together. And so it is my delight and my grief to share her poem Irony with you. And I hope she can hear me where she is, that we made it. Irony. It would be now when you feel want is no longer your enemy, that your body and soul would kneel. Oh, it would be now when you feel you've culled joy, seized a new zeal, that death grabs you, fingers icy. It would be now when you feel want is no longer your enemy. And that was Camila Aisha Moon. My own poem is called Hunger, and I'd like to thank Vijay Sheshadri for selecting this poem where it first originally appeared in the Paris Review. Hunger. Weeks after her death, I came to the garden window to marvel at sudden pale feathers catching, scattering past the rainy glass. I looked for magic everywhere, signs from the afterlife that I was indeed distinct. Beneath the talon of a red-tailed hawk, a pigeon moved briefly until it didn't. The hawk stripped the common bird, piercing its thick neck, beak, probing body, until I could see the blood from where I stood inside. This could happen naturally enough in Brooklyn. This could happen whether or not my mother was dead. I didn't eat for weeks because it felt wrong to want bread and milk. The hawk's face running red, beautiful as it plucked and picked its silver white prey apart. It wasn't magic, but hungrily I watched as if I didn't know memory could devour corpses caught alive in midair. I opened the window, knelt on the fire escape. I was the prey and hawk. This was finally myself swallowing those small, common parts of me, tearing all of that away into strips, pulling my breast open to the bone. I saw myself torn apart, tearing and tearing at the beautiful face, the throat beneath my claw, my grieving face red with being exactly what I knew myself to be. Thank you.
Rachel, Eliza, that was amazing, incredibly moving. Thank you for celebrating and grieving with all of us tonight. Thank you, Chen and Nancy, for your beautiful poems. And thank you, Tracy and David, and everyone at Greenlight Bookstore and everyone here tonight. I'm looking at the list of attendees, friends and strangers who are, potential friends. It's wonderful to be here, even if not in person. I'd like to thank Cornelius Eady, who's the poetry editor at Southampton Review, who first published this poem, which means so much to me. All the stops. Rolling through the intersection, I see in my rear view the back of the familiar octagon rusted over, belying the option of following its forward-facing order. The driver behind me brakes just as half-heartedly, and for a moment I pretend together we'd make one whole heart's best effort to postpone the hurt and hurtle past the red fur of thorn and bud beyond the shoulders as the season nips the next one's heels. If you can't see my mirrors, I can't see you, warns the sticker affixed to the glint of the bumper ahead. But I've only got eyes for the peripheral blood smear shimmer where whatever winter took is finally kicking in. All those years wishing I were sure and thin as a sign and could wait for no mandible, nor manager, nor manna, nor mention. All those years I told my charges to hold my hand and look both ways as I told myself to stop at nothing. Don't let go. Let go. Everywhere the reference of other people's safe words. Dive bars dropping paint flakes and first flowers face down with the sun on their napes. A tinge of desperation in every command. Take it from me. Ahead, a sky scored by some flight's velocity, contrail kindred in its substance, water, pressure. Two lights at a complicated crossing and the capital's cry, this is your signal. Sure, but there are other shapes in me, flipped evergreen like rare old color film and just as quick to burn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora, Rachel, Eliza, Nancy, and Chen. Finding those poems in the journals over the course of, my year of reading, it felt like a breakthrough each time. And I would just love to know, and maybe we can all turn the cameras back on and have a little conversation. Did those feel like breakthrough poems for you? Or what did writing them teach you or remind you? Dora, I can see you first. I think you're the one who got the camera back on fastest. Does that question land anywhere for you?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think it's funny because to me, this poem was kind of an experience of collecting images that then I wanted to bring together into, or images and ideas and all kinds of things that then I wanted to bring together into one moment. So there's a kind of like overlay, which I guess is like any commute or routine, an overlay of moments that like inhabit the same space that then in the space of the poem become one experience. So it was kind of that feeling of like, how do you do that without making it just seem like a mishmash or inauthentic? So it definitely, for me, I mean, it was something where I felt like, I haven't been in a workshop classroom, that side of things in a long time, but it felt like I was doing that to myself, where I was kind of like holding myself to this, this goal or standard that I'd set for myself. So yeah, definitely.
How about other poets? I'm looking at you, Rachel, Eliza, because I mean, it was also a beautiful pairing of your poem with Aisha's poem, because there are opposite sides, it seems, of the same question being expressed. Can you talk a little bit about building hunger?
Yeah, sure. It was really interesting to hear you two speak, Dora, about how you put your poem together, because it was so visual to me, and being a photographer and a visual person, I could kind of see it. Also with Nancy's poem and Chen's poem too, just this kind of building of images. But for hunger, it literally kind of is one of those moments in Brooklyn where you look out your window and there is a huge red-tailed hawk, having lunch in the middle of Brooklyn, and your mother's just died. And, I think in the moment of grief, we want these signs. And so often for me, it's the natural world that is showing me, about relationships and the cycle of relationships, both psychically, like internally inside me, but like a way to think of, I'm thinking of Chen poem of like the rain becoming the dogs and the cats becoming. And so like what in that moment, this hawk's face, like smothered in blood, eating and feasting, became something for me to express my grief. And I would say the poem it starts outward and then it pulls inward into a moment of really direct kind of confrontation with oneself and self-knowledge, self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So powerful.
Thank you.
Nancy, that just thinking about self-knowledge, self-awareness, that your poem is it's terrifying. It's also familiar in a way. Power is operating in so many directions. How did you arrive there?
The poem is based on a memory that I've carried with me throughout my entire life. In fact, I think my sister is on this Zoom. So she was the one that experienced it with me. I grew up in Kansas. And, it's sort of an oxymoronic place of both charm and yet also squalor. And we used to drive for hours and hours into the countryside, and we came across this carnival, which was, people think of a carnival as being this really happy, wonderful place, but a deserted carnival in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, is actually a really terrifying place. And we wanted to ride the tilt-a-whirl, which is such an innocent thing, and it's so filled with joy. And it was the first time, it was an epiphany for me, because I guess I had lived a very safe, sheltered life. It was the first time I had recognized the danger of being in the world as a woman, and seeing it really through my sister's eyes, who was older than I was, and she was beautiful. And it was the recognition of how she attracted attention that felt unsafe, and just kind of a premonition for me moving into the rest of my life, how that was something I might encounter, that there are, people in this world who do not, that mean you harm, and there are men who don't have good intentions towards women. And I'd never seen that before. And it was also a definite recognition of the power imbalance that we experience as women moving through our lives. So I just, attempted to write it, and I think it came out this big, long mess. I was working on it when I was a student. And I just pared it back and pared it back and pared it back until I finally got it to a place where I felt like I could do, justice to the memory. And so thank you.
Yeah, it's a useful poem. And I don't know, I think I'm always looking for poems that are useful, not just to my sense of the craft, which I'm always fed by what I read, and but to living, this hard thing we do. Chen, I love the way that the School of Eternities just doesn't give up. It grows and grows. It asks and asks, and it gets to what feels like a holy place. Can you talk a little bit about that poem as part of your body of work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it definitely is. It's a breakthrough poem. Even though I was trying really hard actually to write short. I was like, I have all these long poems. I was thinking about this next book that's going to come out. And I was like, I have enough long poems as it is, and like these long lines as well. But I just couldn't help it with this one. I just like fell into it, and I wanted to follow the falling, I guess. I wanted to see, how far it could go. And it started, very simply with, really in a Wegmans parking lot, in the car with the classical channel on, and this segment came on that was really philosophical, talking about different kinds of eternity and how, we've thought about, what does eternity mean? What can it look like? And I was just so surprised. It's like expecting something completely different, and I was kind of tired and out of it. But then this just totally captured my imagination. And I'm like, oh, this is something that I've thought about for a long time, actually, for an eternity of its own. And so, yeah, it was just one of those moments where you feel like something's been articulated, right? And you want to follow that. And I've been thinking for a long time as well about my partner's grief, loss of his mother to cancer. which happened very quickly. And yeah, it's so, I mean, it's so hard to write about grief. It's particularly hard, I think, to write about someone else's grief. And I don't know if I have really accomplished that, but I think what I want to do in the poem is document the attempt. You know, trying to yeah, like be in the room with it, with the grief and the loss. So yeah, a lot of it was just following, and trying to listen as best as I could. Yeah.
Beautiful. One of the really, and I guess this is the last question I get to ask of anyone who feels like answering, including you, David. One of the really beautiful things about putting an anthology together is it feels like you're building a community in a way. And I would love to hear you guys talk, if you wish, about the communities, maybe the poetry communities that you see yourself as belonging to or responsible to, and what that has meant even in this heavy time that we're still kind of inside of.
Well, I'm very glad, Tracy, that you seized the opportunity to create in a book a sense of community that people feel, whether their work appears in the book or whether they're reading it. That seems to me to be quite an accomplishment, and I'm delighted that you had that experience reading for the book. I'm not sure people realize how many poems are published in a year, particularly now that we have electronic means of transmission. So no team of readers can really keep up with everything out there, and it's quite an awesome task to have a view of all of poetry. But I feel that if we have a different guest editor each year, we will reconcile various tastes and come up with something that reflects all the vitality that is really going on at the moment, all the change and the continuity at the same time. It's wonderful to be here with you, and mainly to listen to the others, but you made me talk now.
Thanks for reminding us. Yeah, it is an impossible feat, but it almost feels like this series helps to build a sense of where we've been, what we've made possible, you know, even successively. And that's really exciting. It's an exciting roadmap.
Well,
I just want to add, Tracy, that, you know, having immersed myself in this anthology, of which I am so honored to be a part of, the depth and the breadth of the poems that you selected, it's truly amazing. It's such an immersive, incredible experience, and it just covers the gamut of human emotions, especially during this really difficult time that we've all been through. And, you know, it's mournful, and it's celebratory, and it's joyful, and it's, you know, devastating. And I mean, it really covers all of those things. And I just so admire your selection process. Not that I feel I was, you know, I should have been a part of it, but I was delighted to be. And it's really quite a feat. I don't know how you put it together, but it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say too, like, just thinking of community and in this time that we're in, one thing that was a very wonderful reminder of gratitude, but also just intimacy as a reader with other people reading, and people kind of being like locked down, but then, like, you know, that there's this life of books, and even right now, this kind of fear that because of the pandemic, there are shortages of paper and resources and things to even make books right now. And you think, oh goodness, I can't live without my books. But you also think the community of readers, of getting names. I'm always asking people, what are you reading? And it becomes this way to always expand community, because I am the person that will go look and order like every book and, and want to, join community, because I know I wouldn't be here without it. And so I think there is that action, and this series is certainly part of that action of awareness and knowing how meaningful it is to have poetry everywhere, whether it's on the back of a coffee cup, or you have I just got these Lucille Clifton cards that are wonderful, but it's just, that you could have this kind of sense of that you're not alone. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And that there's something that poetry does with that aloneness and that eternity, that I feel it even virtually right now, that we all care. And I know this word care too was a word that our dear sister Camila used all the time, was this idea of caring and care. So I just want to thank everyone, us gathering, and we've made a community right here. And so we get to take that where we may and keep it going and do more action.
It's well put. I know there are people in the audience who have questions, and so maybe I will invite Jean to give us a glimpse of what those questions are, but maybe if there are more perspectives on that sense of community, they can get filtered in through some of the other questions that we hear.
Yes, that would be so great. We've just got a couple of questions, and if anybody in the audience has anything they'd like to ask, now is really the time. We've got a question from Ali, who asks, for those who write across multiple genres, such as poetry, memoir, fiction, essays, how do you decide on genre when you start a writing project?
I can just briefly say, because I've been working on this collection of crafts / personal essays. It's really hard to say. I have such poetry brain, for better or worse. I want to just treat everything that I'm working on in that same way. But it's also been really good to shift gears. So I was asked, last year to write some craft essays, and that's how this project really started. I was just so glad to be working on something, because it'd been a while and I was having a lot of trouble writing poems. I was having trouble reading poems too. I was just, in a very unhopeful state, and a kind of unalive state, really. So getting to turn to another genre was great for that. Just thought about thinking about community, Tracy's question. Because I realize I'm still not super hopeful about many things right now. But what the poems do is remind me that I can feel all these other things, right? I can feel gratitude. I can feel love. I can feel alive, right? Which is what I'm always looking for. I can feel rage, and I can feel grief. And so, even when I don't feel so hopeful about the world, the poems are there to show me all the other things that I can feel and look at.
So I'll say this is kind of an oblique answer to both of the two previous questions, and maybe neither of them, which is that as we get back into something like actual gathering in spaces together, I just am reminded that there isn't quite a substitute for it, that it's just amazing. And so, when I'm thinking of communities of writers in Baltimore, particularly an organization I work with called Writers in Baltimore Schools, and just seeing young people getting back together is so great. But I also realize, and this maybe sounds a little creepy, but how much the relationships I had with people on the page through their writing mattered to me during the pandemic. like I'm thinking, I mean, Chen, there was a student who like was feeling really adrift, and I assigned your smoothie craft chap, and they loved it, and like talking about that, about that project. Rachel Eliza, assigning, your book and talking about like photographs and writing together and like, talking about that. So that's just to say, I feel like that's like one of the either beautiful, strange things about writing is, in a way, being in community with people who you maybe don't even know particularly well, but feeling that intimacy with them. And to answer the question about genre, I'll just say I just love. I feel like whenever poets like stray into other genres or other media, I just get so thrilled. I feel like it's like watching somebody like dance. You're like, I didn't know you moved that way. Cool. So I love it. So if in any way that's kind of an oblique question about like, how does one move from poetry into another genre? I mean, I just think like experimenting and trying new things and stepping outside your comfort zone is so great. And I just love to read it when poets do.
And if I can just piggyback on the community thing for a minute, as Tracy mentioned, I teach poetry workshops in jails and prisons. And there is nothing like seeing a group of disparate people who are in different gangs and different backgrounds come into a room together and put all of that aside and be a part of a poetry community. It's a way for them to connect deeply and recognize the humanity in each other. And it's so transcendent. I don't even, I've tried to write about it and I haven't even come close, but it's a really amazing thing that poetry can do for people in a community. And I feel like, we're giving these justice compromised people a gift to take back into their communities, to teach to their children and their families. And poetry has the power to do that. And I'm just so grateful to be in this community, to be accepted by it, to be a part of it. So thank you.
Where do you teach, Nancy? Which penitentiary or facility?
Well, I taught for a few years at the encouragement of Ellen Bass at Salinas Valley State Prison in a program that she started there. And then together we started a program locally in Santa Cruz, and we teach in all of the Santa Cruz County jails. And we teach men and we teach women. And, these are people who've never been given an opportunity to really learn how to tap into their emotions and express themselves. And it's just wonderful to see them be able to, to create this safe space in which they can do that and really connect with each other. And, I've seen, there's tears, there's joy, there's so many wonderful things that happen. And I really wish that we could just go in and instead of incarcerating people, we could just teach them poetry, because that would be a lot more effective. But
can I send you a copy of the anthology for the poetry group?
Oh, please do. That would be fabulous. I'll connect with you.
Address.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
We'll do that.
Excellent. And we've got one more question from the audience. This is from Cynthia, who writes, "It's interesting how all of these poems were initiated in or near cars and cities. What role do the poets think the human/urban locations played in the work?" And I also kind of want to add my own sidebar to this question, which is I'm really curious as to how how your relationships as poets with place were inflected by the past year, whether or not that was a factor in the poem you shared tonight.
Such a great question.
Yeah, I can just say that, I wrote that poem when I moved back to the Boston area. I lived there previously. and was thinking about, because I met my partner in upstate New York when I was at Syracuse. Just thinking back on that time, but also like the various places that we've lived. So yeah, it's like maybe my most place-filled poem. It's really about, yeah, how we've moved together. Yeah.
I was going to address the question of writing in different media, because I do that all the time. I'm always working concurrently on at least 3 projects, Best American Poetry being one of them, and I write poetry, and then I'm often writing a nonfiction book. And it used to be that I would write the nonfiction book when I had a contract, and I would write poetry in any case. But now, one of my nonfiction books I just wrote without encouragement from a publisher, and so I can't even make that distinction any longer. It's one. Everyone knows all the bad things about aging, but one of the better things is that if you have a strong work ethic, you've got to have written a lot of books, and so you've tried all sorts of things. Sometimes you start with the title, and sometimes you taught yourself the subject in the research, and then sometimes without your knowing it, the poems you were writing at the same time were mirroring the research you were doing. And so there's all this really interesting dynamic going on. And also, I don't think you can write, I can't write poetry for 8 hours, but I can compartmentalize and spend an hour doing editing and rewriting other people's prose, and or writing a movie column. I get to write a column about movies every month. So and someone said that they maybe it was Dora, that she loves it when someone dances and you didn't know that fat man can really dance very gracefully. It's nice for us to read what we do in other genres, because we poets write all sorts of things, mystery novels and other novels, and it's don't underrate the poets. They're like Chris Taylor of the Dodgers, not just the utility infielder, but someone who can hit 3 home runs in one game in the postseason. There you are.
I will just add that in my graduate program, the poets were the fighter pilots.
Well, that beats everything I said.
Here come the metaphors for what we do. I was thinking about the ways that nature became such a powerful source during this time of enclosure, but also, Eliza, you mentioned that looking out your window and seeing in the natural world an answer to what was going on inside of your life. This was a time where I was afraid, I was angry, I was grieving, I was scared, I was lonely, stir crazy, and what trees did, what birds did, what the seasons did was instructive. It became a language, and some of that lives in some of the newer poems that I have, but I think a lot of it has just become a way of considering, where we are, where I am, and what I might do to get elsewhere, or how I might just live in the conditions that I can't get out of. And that felt really powerful.
Yeah, for those who have the book, and hopefully everyone will end up getting the book. I think Ada Limon's poem, The End of Poetry, really kind of captures some some of what I would want to say in response to this question. There's like this, it's a kind of like a restless litany that's like negating all of these, both like these beautiful things of the natural world, and then the kind of like tropes of grieving and poetry and memory. And it just ends, I am human, enough I am alone, enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate, enough of the animals saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease, I am asking you to touch me. Which I remember reading that, not every poem in here I encountered before the anthology, but this is one where I feel like probably a lot of us read and we're like, this is better go in Best American Poetry. we need to hold on to this. And I think part of it is because it is kind of exploring like a certain confinement or a certain restlessness, but also like reaching out from that too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would maybe add to just thinking about place, and for me, it's like landscape. So, you kind of in the environment that you may find yourself in. For I think for poets, it's often just the environment of wonder itself, or a question, and that you're not even, the journey, of course, is not the answer, but it's just kind of, what's on the road, what's behind you, what might be that thing on the side that you can't even see, that still blindsides you, with its beauty or its terror. But I know, me, being a photographer, in my last book, it was a hybrid book where landscape was really essential to me, thinking about my like kind of new vulnerability, being motherless and being like literally a small body next to, like, I'm out in the desert climbing into a canyon, and these rocks with the water for hundreds of thousand years have made these like paintings on these rocks. And you kind of like really, it's comforting in a way, because you're not going to be here. Like it's just, it kind of is really clarifying. So I think thinking about place for me, and then, the poem that's in the anthology, Brooklyn was such a place of kind of coming into oneself and then realizing needing to leave it and really getting far away from it, but like letting go of it was a grief. And, even now when I return to Brooklyn, sometimes I'll see things and I'll think of my mother, or relationships that ended, or, Tracy and I used to be neighbors, and I'd get to like walk up to go get eggs and I might see Tracy, and it was glorious. And there were other writers like Vijay and different people. So, the kind of local sensation of like place and where you might be, but then that psychic or spiritual place. Like for me, it's Northern California, usually, where I always have some dream going on inside of me, where I am over by like McClure's Beach, Stinson Beach. I'm up by Muir Woods, checking out the redwoods, and I'm just always there, like even right now. So I don't know. I know it's so cheesy, but I do adore trees too. And so I really like this question, which is really complicated and one I'll be thinking about for sure later. Thanks.
One of the beautiful poems in the book that I think really encaptures that is This Is a Love Poem to Trees by Hannah Marshall, which is, it's kind of an exploration of her life through a description of the trees she's encountered in different locations and different places. And they really, it's truly remarkable. So I think that for me, it's like it not only embodies nature, but it embodies our relationship with nature throughout our lives.
I am so loath to draw this evening to a close. I'm sure we could while away so many hours talking about all the directions in which this anthology sends us, which is so wonderful and a testament to the necessity of poetry, especially in this year, 2021. I want to thank you all so much for that wonderful reading, discussion, and to thank everyone who attended tonight. That's it for us. You make sure to buy your copy of the Best American Poetry 2021 in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Thank you all again and again and again. And have a wonderful evening wherever you are. And I hope we get to all cross paths again sometime soon.
Thank you.
All
Night.
right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.